Tonight, close your eyes and let the soft glow of the auroras guide you into a peaceful slumber. Imagine a world where the crisp winter air is filled with quiet magic, and a journey awaits through snowy landscapes and shimmering lights. In this story, Clara embarks on an extraordinary adventure where memories and choices shape the path ahead. As you listen, let the warmth of kindness and the light of hope wrap around you like a cozy blanket, leading you into a deep, restful sleep. Let the story unfold and feel the magic carry you gently into dreams. The air was sharp with frost, each breath a fleeting ghost that dissolved into the night. Clara sat by the window, watching snow gather on the branches of the holly bush outside. The moon hung low, its light cold and spectral, casting the world in silver and shadow. She drew her blanket tighter, her mind idly wandering, until something peculiar caught her eye. A glint of red. She blinked, leaned closer, and squinted through the frost-patterned glass. There it was again, a faint shimmer nestled deep within the snow-dappled holly. Her heart quickened with a pang of curiosity. Clara slipped on her boots, wrapped herself in her thickest scarf, and stepped into the biting night. The bush seemed ordinary enough, its leaves waxy and cold under her touch. But there, entwined in its branches, was a crimson envelope. Its surface was smooth and warm, as though untouched by the icy air. Her name, Clara Elwood, was inscribed in delicate looping golden script. No address, no stamp, just her name. She turned it over, hesitating before breaking the seal. The wax crumbled easily, revealing a single sheet of parchment inside. On it, in the same golden ink, were just a few words. The North Pole Express. Departure, midnight. Beneath the text was a gleaming ticket, as red and gold as the envelope, embossed with strange symbols that seemed to shift under the moonlight. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A prank, surely. She glanced around the empty yard, the snow crunching faintly beneath her boots, but there was no sign of anyone, only the stillness of winter. Yet, something tugged at her, a sense of inevitability, as though the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for her decision. The clock struck midnight with a low, sonorous chime. Clara found herself drawn to the edge of town, where the old railway line lay abandoned. It had been years since trains had come through, the tracks now buried beneath frost and overgrown with weeds. But as she neared the station, a soft golden glow cut through the darkness. The train was there. Its carriages were impossibly long, stretching into the night like the tail of a comet. The engine exhaled plumes of shimmering steam that twisted skyward, vanishing into the stars. The windows glowed faintly, their panes fogged with warmth. Clara's pulse quickened. A figure emerged from the shadows. A tall man cloaked in a coat of deep emerald velvet. his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He stepped forward with a quiet grace, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and extended a gloved hand. "Your ticket, Miss Elwood," he said, his voice smooth and deep, like the resonance of a far-off bell. Clara hesitated before holding out the ticket. He accepted it with a nod, his gloved fingers brushing hers. A strange warmth radiated from him, and his gaze, though kind, seemed to pierce through her. "This is the North Pole Express?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The conductor smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Indeed, your journey begins now. Do not be afraid." Before she could reply, he gestured toward the train. The door to the nearest carriage opened soundlessly, revealing a staircase that shimmered like ice, but felt solid beneath her boots. Clara stepped inside, the air growing warm and rich with the scent of peppermint and pine. The interior of the carriage was like stepping into another world. The walls were panelled with a wood so dark it seemed almost black, adorned with shifting patterns of snowflakes that glowed faintly. The ceiling was a canvas of stars, each one flickering and pulsing as if alive. Passengers, young and old, sat in silence, their faces illuminated by the golden light that emanated from nowhere and everywhere at once. Clara took a seat near the window, clutching her scarf tightly. She glanced outside, expecting to see the familiar outlines of her town, but the station was already gone. Instead, the train was moving through a landscape of pure, untouched snow, its surface glittering like a field of diamonds under the moonlight. The train began to pick up speed, the rhythmic hum of its wheels merging with a low, melodic sound, almost like a song, ancient and unknowable. Clara leaned against the cool glass, her breath fogging the window. Where was this train taking her? And what, she wondered, awaited her at its mysterious destination? The North Pole Express hurtled onward, cutting through the frozen night, carrying its passengers ever closer to the unknown. The steady rhythm of the train grew hypnotic, a constant lull that seemed to echo in Clara's chest. Outside the window, the world was unrecognizable, a landscape of frost and shadow, where trees gleamed like glass and hills shimmered as though dusted with powdered starlight. The train's motion was impossibly smooth, gliding over the snow rather than tracks, as if the very earth bent to its will. Clara shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to the other passengers. Each wore an expression caught somewhere between wonder and trepidation. A boy across the aisle was holding a silver watch, turning it over and over in his hands. An older woman beside him clutched a faded photograph, her fingers trembling. None spoke, yet Clara felt an invisible thread connecting them, as if they all shared an unspoken understanding of why they had been called. The door at the end of the carriage creaked open. Clara turned, startled, as the conductor reappeared. His emerald coat seemed to shimmer in the dim light, the gold trim catching the flicker of the shifting snowflake patterns on the walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low and resonant, "you are invited to explore. The North Pole Express is more than a vessel. It is an experience. Each door you pass through will reveal a truth, a memory, or a question. It is for you to decide what to do with them." Clara's curiosity burned like a spark in the cold. She stood, her boots muffled against the plush carpet, and followed the others as they began to drift toward the next carriage. The boy with the watch hesitated at the threshold, glancing back at Clara as if to confirm she was coming. She gave a small nod, though her heart pounded with uncertainty. The next door slid open with a sound like a sigh. The new carriage was unlike anything Clara had seen. The walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of glass snow globes, each one perfectly round, each one swirling with a storm that never settled. But as she approached, Clara realized the storms were not random. Within each globe, scenes unfolded, children laughing, families gathered by fires, acts of kindness captured in delicate detail. She reached for one, a globe no larger than an apple, and cupped it in her hands. Inside, a younger version of herself appeared, standing in a snowy alley. She remembered the moment instantly. A homeless man sitting by the bakery, his shoulders hunched against the cold. Clara had taken off her scarf and wrapped it around him, ignoring her own shivering hands. The memory played out silently, yet it felt alive in her palms. When she set the globe back on the shelf, the storm inside it stilled, and the glass shimmered faintly, as though thanking her. "Why do they show us these things?" the boy with the watch asked, his voice breaking the hush. "To remind you," the conductor answered from the doorway, "of what has been and what can still be. Memories are more than echoes. They are choices waiting to be made again." The boy frowned, his fingers tightening around his watch. Clara wanted to ask him what memory it held, but before she could, the conductor gestured toward the next door. The next carriage was colder, the air tinged with a metallic sharpness. Here, rows of ledgers stretched endlessly into the gloom. Their spines glowed faintly, names etched into them in neat, precise handwriting. Clara felt the enormity of the place weigh on her chest. "What is this?" she whispered. "The archive," the conductor replied. "Every act of kindness and every selfish deed recorded here. Some volumes are thin, others thick. None are final." Clara's fingers brushed against a ledger bearing her own name. She hesitated, then opened it. The pages turned of their own accord, revealing moments both bright and shadowed. Her heart clenched as she read of times she had ignored someone in need, passed by without a second glance. But there were other entries too, small acts, unnoticed and unremarkable, yet shining like stars on the parchment. "Why show us this?" someone asked. To remind you, the conductor said again, his voice softer now, that every choice matters, no matter how small. The journey continued, each carriage unveiling something new. A room where whispers filled the air, speaking truths no one dared admit. Another where stars hung suspended, glowing faintly with the hopes and fears of passengers. Clara began to feel the train was more than a means of travel. It was a test, a mirror, and a guide all at once. By the time they reached the final door, Clara's mind was spinning with questions. The conductor stood before it, his emerald coat catching the light like the surface of a frozen lake. "Beyond this door," he said, "the path grows uncertain. Proceed only if you are prepared to confront what lies at the heart of it all." The boy with the watch stepped forward first, his shoulders squared. Clara followed, her breath catching as the door slid open, revealing a world unlike any she had ever imagined. The air grew colder. The train itself seemed to hold its breath as they crossed the threshold, stepping into the unknown. The air shifted the moment they stepped into the next carriage, turning sharper, colder, as if they had crossed some invisible boundary between the familiar and the extraordinary. The walls here seemed alive, moving, breathing, shimmering with faint traces of frost that swirled like ghostly ink. Each step Clara took resonated softly, her breath visible in the dim ethereal glow. Others followed behind her, their footsteps hesitant. The boy with the silver watch walked just ahead, his fingers gripping the timepiece so tightly it seemed almost fused to his palm. The older woman with the photograph paused, her gaze fixed on something unseen. Clara wanted to comfort her, but words felt too fragile in a place like this. The conductor stood at the far end of the carriage, silent and watchful, his emerald coat blending into the shifting light. His presence was a beacon and a warning. This carriage was different from the others, its space seemingly endless and filled with strange doorways that appeared and vanished like flickering shadows. Each door was marked with symbols Clara could not read but somehow felt. Shapes that hummed with meaning just beyond the grasp of understanding. The boy with the watch approached one door hesitantly. As his fingers brushed its handle, the symbol on the door ignited, casting a pale, icy glow that enveloped him. The door opened without a sound, revealing a swirling void of silvery mist. He glanced back at Clara for a fleeting moment, his expression unreadable before stepping through and vanishing. Clara felt a pang of fear. "What's happening? Where did he go?" The conductor's voice was calm, almost reverent. "Each door holds a truth, a choice, or a fragment of what lies ahead. No one's journey is the same. You too must choose when the time comes." Clara shivered, but her feet carried her forward as though guided by an unseen force. One of the doorways began to shimmer as she approached, the symbol etched upon it glowing faintly. It resembled a snowflake, intricate and delicate, yet somehow alive. The handle was cold beneath her touch, but not unpleasantly so. When the door opened, it revealed a scene from her past, a memory she had not revisited in years. She saw herself as a child, no more than 7, standing in her grandmother's kitchen. Snow clung to her boots, melting into small puddles on the floor as she helped her grandmother bake cookies. She had almost forgotten the warmth of that kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and pine, the way her grandmother's hands moved with quiet precision. "Why this memory?" Clara whispered aloud. The conductor did not answer, but the memory shifted. She watched her younger self pause, turning toward the window where a boy stood outside in the snow, his face pressed against the glass. She remembered him now, a neighbor's child, lonely and often ignored. She had hesitated then, unsure, before handing him a cookie through the cracked open door. The memory faded, leaving Clara with an ache she could not name. "It's not just about what you've done," the conductor said quietly, his voice closer now. "It's about what you will do." Clara moved to the next room, her footsteps growing heavier. This carriage was darker, the air colder still. Here, suspended in mid-air, hung stars, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each one pulsing faintly with light. As Clara approached, one star flickered brighter, drawing her gaze. When she touched it, a wave of warmth coursed through her, and a voice, familiar yet distant, spoke softly in her mind. "Clara," it whispered, "you've always had the light within you. Don't let it dim." The star dissolved into a shower of golden sparks, leaving her standing in silence. She turned to the conductor, her voice trembling. "Why are we being shown these things? What's the purpose?" "To prepare you," he replied simply, "for what lies beneath the ice." The train lurched slightly, a sensation Clara had not felt until now. It was as if they had left behind the endless snowfields and entered a deeper, more ancient realm. Outside the windows, the frost seemed darker, the glow beneath the ice fainter. The auroras that had danced across the sky earlier were gone, replaced by an emptiness that felt vast and consuming. Others returned from their doors, their faces pale and solemn. The boy with the watch sat quietly, his gaze distant, the silver timepiece now dangling loosely from his hand. The older woman clutched her photograph to her chest, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The conductor walked the length of the carriage, his footsteps measured. "The time has come," he announced, his voice a low rumble that carried through the silence. "Ahead lies the heart of it all. Not all who come this far choose to see it. Decide now if you will proceed." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her. The other passengers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one moved to leave. Something about the journey, its secrets, its revelations, bound them all to its end. As the train slowed, Its rhythm faltering for the first time, Clara gripped the edge of her seat. Outside the windows, a cavern loomed, its walls glowing faintly with an icy, otherworldly light. The train came to a halt, and the door to the next carriage slid open. "Step forward," the conductor said, his voice softer now. "What you seek lies beneath the ice." Clara rose, her heart pounding. Whatever waited beyond, she knew she could not turn back now. The air that greeted Clara beyond the final carriage was colder than she thought possible. A silence so deep, it seemed to press against her chest. She stepped cautiously onto a platform carved from glimmering ice, its surface smooth as glass. Above her, jagged stalactites glittered like frozen daggers, and below, the ice glowed faintly, lit from within by an unearthly light. The cavern stretched endlessly in every direction, its size humbling and disorienting. Other passengers emerged one by one, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The boy with the watch clutched it tightly, his knuckles pale. The older woman wrapped her scarf around her face, her steps faltering as if the weight of the journey had begun to bear down on her. All were silent, their faces a mirror of Clara's own unease. And then from the depths of the cavern, a sound. It began as a low hum, resonant and deep, vibrating through the ice. The light beneath their feet pulsed faintly in rhythm with the sound, growing brighter, then dimmer, like the beat of a heart. Clara's pulse quickened as the conductor stepped forward, his figure a dark silhouette against the shimmering expanse. "This," he said, his voice solemn, "is the heart of the North Pole." The passengers exchanged uncertain glances. Clara's gaze was fixed on the light, which seemed to grow stronger the closer they came to the cavern's center. There, rising from the ice like a monument carved by time itself, was a crystalline structure. It was enormous, its shape both organic and precise, as if nature and craftsmanship had conspired to create it. "The heart powers everything," the conductor continued. "Not just the pole, but the very spirit of Christmas itself. Every act of kindness, every moment of selflessness feeds its light. But," he added, his voice heavy now, "it is fragile, and it is fading." Clara felt a pang in her chest. The crystalline heart, so grand and luminous, pulsed erratically, its light flickering in and out. Cracks ran along its surface, faint but unmistakable, like veins etched in frost. "What's causing it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The conductor's gaze settled on her, steady and unflinching. "The world's light dims when its people forget what it means to give without expecting anything in return. Greed, selfishness, apathy. These things poison the heart." A murmur rippled through the group. The older woman clutched her photograph tighter while the boy's watch trembled in his hand. Clara stared at the heart, her thoughts a tangle of doubt and determination. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, and the air grew warmer, as though the very cavern acknowledged his presence. He was unlike any depiction of Santa Clara had ever seen. His form was tall, cloaked in rippling auroras that shifted with every step. His face was partially obscured, as though veiled by the northern lights themselves. But his eyes were sharp and ancient, brimming with wisdom and sorrow. He raised a hand and the cavern fell silent. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying both authority and warmth. "You have come not just to witness, but to decide." "Decide?" Clara echoed, stepping forward despite herself. Santa's gaze turned to her, piercing yet kind. "The heart is failing. Its light flickers because the world has forgotten what it means to share in its glow. But there is still hope, if you and the others are willing to give a part of yourselves." Clara frowned, confused. "A part of ourselves? How?" Santa extended his hand, palm up, and a soft light blossomed there. It grew, transforming into an orb that pulsed gently, mirroring the rhythm of the crystalline heart. Each of you carries within you memories of selflessness. They are small acts, perhaps forgotten by you, but not by the heart. If you are willing to share those moments, the heart can be restored. The boy with the watch stepped forward, his voice trembling. "And if we don't?" Santa's gaze softened. "Then the light will dim further and eventually fade. Without it, the spirit of Christmas, the power that brings warmth to the coldest hearts, will disappear." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her. She thought of the snow globe she had held earlier, the memory of giving her scarf to a stranger. It had been a small thing, something she had barely thought of afterward, yet it had felt so vivid in the moment. Could it truly matter that much? Santa's eyes found hers, as though reading her thoughts. It is not the size of the act, but the sincerity behind it. Even the smallest light can grow if shared. One by one, the passengers stepped forward. The older woman clutched her photograph, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, as a faint light emerged from her chest and floated toward the heart. The boy with the watch hesitated, then held it out as if letting go of a great burden. His light, silver and bright, joined the others. When it was Clara's turn, her hands trembled. She closed her eyes, thinking of the scarf, of her grandmother's kitchen, of every small kindness she had given or received. She felt a warmth blossom in her chest, and when she opened her eyes, a golden light hovered before her. It floated toward the crystalline heart, merging with the others. The heart began to glow brighter, the cracks mending, its pulse steady and strong. The cavern filled with a warm, radiant light, and for the first time, Clara felt not the cold of the ice, but the warmth of hope. As the light reached its peak, Santa spoke again, his voice carrying a gentle gratitude. "You have reminded the world what it means to share its light. Remember this always." The train's whistle echoed faintly in the distance, calling them back. Clara turned to follow, her heart lighter yet filled with questions. The journey was not over. The journey back to the train was silent, as though the cavern itself demanded reverence for what had transpired. Clara's steps were deliberate, her breath slow and visible in the cold. But her heart felt strangely light, as though it had shed some unseen weight. The crystalline heart behind them pulsed steadily now, its glow vibrant and unbroken, casting the cavern in an otherworldly light. Others walked ahead of her. The older woman, her shoulders straighter now. The boy, still clutching his watch, though it no longer trembled in his grasp. The passengers seemed changed, not in any visible way, but in their presence. Their quiet resolve. Clara glanced over her shoulder one last time. The figure cloaked in auroras stood motionless by the crystalline heart, his face still partially obscured. Though his form radiated warmth, there was a lingering sadness in his stance, as though even this victory came with its own burdens. The conductor waited by the train's open door, his emerald coat gleaming faintly. He inclined his head as Clara approached, a gesture that felt less like a farewell and more like an acknowledgement. "You have given much tonight," he said softly, "and in return, you have gained something even greater." "What have we gained?" Clara asked, her voice tentative. He smiled faintly, enigmatic as ever. "Understanding, and perhaps a little more faith in the light we all carry." Back on the train, the carriages were the same as before, shimmering walls adorned with shifting snowflakes, ceilings lit with constellations that seemed to breathe. Yet the air felt different now, lighter, as though the train itself had been relieved of some invisible burden. Clara took her seat by the window, watching the other passengers settle into theirs. The boy with the watch sat across from her, his fingers idly tracing the edges of the timepiece. He caught her eye and smiled, a gesture so small and fleeting she almost missed it. The train began to move, gliding effortlessly across the ice. The rhythm of its wheels was softer now, more like a melody than a hum. Outside, the frozen expanse stretched endlessly. But the auroras had returned, swirling across the sky in vibrant waves of colour. Clara watched them in silence, her thoughts a quiet storm. "Do you think it will last?" the boy asked suddenly, breaking the stillness. She turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" "The heart," he said, his voice quieter now. "Do you think it'll stay bright, or will it fade again?" Clara considered his question. "I think it's up to us, and everyone else. The light only dims if we forget it's there." He nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. "I guess we just have to remember then." The train's pace slowed as it approached its destination. Clara felt the change in the air, a subtle shift, like the exhale of something ancient and vast. The passengers stirred, gathering their belongings, but no one spoke. It was as if words would shatter the delicate silence that had settled over them. When the train finally stopped, Clara hesitated. The boy had already disappeared into the crowd, as had the older woman and the others. She was the last to rise, her fingers brushing against the frost-framed window one final time before stepping into the aisle. The conductor stood at the door, his expression unreadable but kind. As she passed him, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A silver bell, no larger than a coin, its surface polished to a mirror-like shine. "This is for you," he said, placing it in her hand. Clara tilted her head, puzzled. "Why?" "To remind you of the journey," he replied, "and of the light you carry. It will guide you when the world feels dark." The bell felt warm in her palm, its faint chime resonating softly in the stillness. She nodded, murmuring a quiet thank you, and stepped off the train. The world outside was both familiar and strange. Snow blanketed the ground, the stars above shone brighter, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine. Yet something had changed, though Clara couldn't quite name it. As she walked back toward her home, she noticed little things. Windows glowing warmly in houses that had once seemed cold. Neighbors exchanging smiles where there had once been indifference. The world seemed softer, kinder, as though the light restored to the heart had spilled into the lives of those who dwelled far from it. When she reached her house, she paused by the holly bush. There, nestled among its branches, was another crimson envelope. Her name was written on it, but beneath her own were two more names, names she didn't recognize. Clara opened the envelope with trembling fingers, finding not a train ticket, but a single sentence written in gold. "The light you give will always return to you." The bell chimed faintly in her pocket as Clara stepped inside, her heart full of something she could not quite define, but knew she would carry forever. Above her, the auroras danced, and somewhere deep beneath the ice, the crystalline heart pulsed steadily, a light that would never fade as long as even one soul remembered its glow.